Yeah, it's very good that you give a very different perspective, Christian perspective on this issue. And yeah, she quoted about Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyah by Al-Mawardi. And I guess it's a famous book being quoted again and again by the religious authorities in this country. Because it basically sets a dual system where you have a Muslim and the second-class citizens, what they call as the Zimmis or the non-Muslims, right? And they're supposed to behave in certain ways. And they also, if you read the what they call a manuscript about the Islamic State by the government about 10 or 15 years ago, then you see that the Al-Mawardi Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyah was quoted again and again. It was as if it was a text from the Holy Quran. Right? So this is a problem that we're facing nowadays.
That's why I got into trouble.
Yeah, basically. But, a good Islamic scholar, such as Dr. Azam Tamimi, he was a guest of IRF and he was a guest of Ikram as well, who came here and in a speech at ISTAC, which used to be a place where we hold our events until we were booted out. He said that this Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyah by Al-Mawardi was probably the worst literature ever written by an Islamic scholar.
You know he was a Coptic Christian before he became a Muslim?
No, I don't know that.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is very strange. It is very strange, Up to the level that he says that, only if the non-Muslims were to pay jizya, they cannot even ride horses to go and pay jizya. They must walk on their foot, and they must walk in a way that their heads are bowed down and to pay jizya. And so many other things. These kind of discriminatory things that if you think that Adolf Hitler is bad, then, that probably he learned from Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyah.
Yeah, one thing on that. The restrictions on the dhimmi increased over time as fiqh developed. Partly it got worse as a reaction to the Crusades, because the Christian became the enemy and worse restrictions. It was all political. It was in the political context.
Yeah. And secondly, at the second point that I would like to raise is, Brother Mustafa and Patricia mentioned about Murji'ah. Why is it that this kind of theological thoughts are not being discussed nowadays? Murji'ah, Mu'tazilah, they're considered heretics. It's as simple as if you look at textbooks, Dato' Farida knows better. If you look at textbook, the Islamic education textbooks, they have this categorized. These are the deviant sects. So inside these deviant sects would be the Murji'ah, the Mu'tazilah. So, and students have no avenues to ask questions. They cannot ask. Why do you think that Mu'tazilas are heretics? No, they cannot ask such questions. So the thing is that this kind of idea of irja and a few other things were not being discussed in schools, among us, and even among adults as well. So because we've taken for granted, and every time and again, it goes back to, they will quote this very well-known hadith, "Taraktu fikum amrain lan tadhillu in tamassaktum bihima, kitab Allah wa sunnata rasulih." And I've left behind two things. If you hold fast to it, you will not get lost. Kitab Allah, the Quran, the book of Allah, and Sunnah, the Sunnah of the Prophet, and Sunnah of his Prophet. That's the Sunni tradition. But you have a different variation if you look at the hadith from the Shiites. The Shiites would say not Kitab Allah wa Sunnata Rasulih. The Shiite will say Kitab Allah wa Ahlihi. Means that the book of the Prophet and my family. And that is why they are known as Ahlul Bayt. They follow the Ahlul Bayt, Ali and the descendants of the Prophet. So, these are the kind of things that we have to revise and discuss again and again. And this idea about the irja by Murji'ah, the idea of rationalism by the Mu'tazilah, these are very important ideas that should be discussed in the 21st century. And
Just say one
yeah.
very quick
one very quick thing. In fact, the word Mu'tazila has now become an insult. So if you go to Sisters in Islam website, or if you go to Project Dialogue, when they want to insult you, yes, you're a Mu'tazila. Like, you understand or not what it means. And in education, they are not being taught in Sekolah Agama or in the Agama classes that we are Kitabiyun, not to be hated, that we are Ahlul Kitab, of the lineage of Abraham. That is not being taught. So everything is hate Christian, hate cross, hate Christian. Very difficult. My last point before I shut up. When I said support civil society organizations, even if they're talking about Islam or they're Muslim, here's Datuk Nur Farida Arifin of G25. Please support them too, because they are taking on head-on religious authorities, the corruption in the country. Let's not go into all the details, but support them. Let us be coalitions in our illiberal democracy. Forget the diversity of our religions. Thank you.
Now, can I invite Mr. Aston Fiver? Thank you.
Could there be religious diversity? Okay, I mean, doing away with all this illiberal democracy and those kind of words, the fact is that in Malaysia, there's really no reason why you can't have religious diversity, because when you go back to the constitution, it's actually really clear, and it seems to have been drafted in a way to specifically guarantee religious diversity. If you look at Article 3, it says Islam is the religion of the Federation, semicolon, but other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony in any part of the Federation. So semicolon, but, whenever you see something like that in legal language, it simply means it's a proviso. That means a proviso means it is a statement that's supposed to qualify the statement made before that. So Islam is the religion of the Federation, but it cannot be imposed on anyone else. You are free to practice your religion in peace and harmony. So you have that. And then you have, of course, you have provisions that guarantee the existence of parliament, election, to get laws passed, and you have a freedom of religion clause in the Malaysian constitution. And many other important constitutional rights, as well as human rights, can be found in the Malaysian constitution. Freedom of expression, speech, assembly, liberty, freedom against slavery, right to property, right to education, equality. It's all there, you know. So what seems to be the problem? Why is it that it's become a recurring problem amongst religious minorities, in particular in this country? And why is it that they cannot exercise those very things that the Constitution guarantees, which is the right to profess, practice, and propagate your religion, as well as the right of religious groups to manage their religious affairs in a way that is consistent with the law? As I see it, I think over the years there's been this marshalling. I mean, if you want to call it being a demagogue, I think that would probably be the right word. It's basically using religion as a means of populist control. And that's really what it comes down to. Religion is an extremely good political tool because there is an air or a veneer of sanctity to it. You don't question religion, you know, or rather you're not really encouraged to. And when you put that on government, on civil administration, and then you come up with this subsequent rhetoric that, well, you can't criticize, this is religion, you know, what we choose to do with this zakat funds or whatever is none of your business. That's when you create the very situation whereby abuse of power and disregard for the Constitution takes place, because people are given the illusion that you cannot question, and people don't question. And that's what, I mean, to put things in layman's perspective, that's when the bad guys get in control of things. So, and let me give you some few examples just to show you how religious diversity have existed in Malaysia. Let's look at the Ahmadis. The Ahmadis is a brilliant example. In the 1980s, okay, before that, let me just say this first before I get to that. A few other things the Constitution guarantees, very important things that, you know, every modern, well, if you would like to call it modern liberal democracies will have, because it's always been part of modern state constitutions. Rule of law, you know, the law is supreme. The law that is passed by Parliament, and the law that's higher than that, which is the Constitution. Secondly, separation of powers. Power cannot be put into one authority, it becomes autocratic. So we have legislature, executive, judiciary. And they all keep each other in check. And that's when you come to the third one, which is the judiciary must be independent. You know that the judiciary is independent in any country when that particular officer is guaranteed security of tenure, meaning you cannot be removed unless you're tribunalized. And that as a judge, if I can be certain that I can make any decision I want and I cannot be removed, otherwise than misconduct, I will be independent because I have nothing to lose. I'll decide in a way that as I've read the Constitution and interpreted it, I'll do that. So you have all of this in the Malaysian Constitution. None of this is not there, you know. So we, in effect, we are a liberal democracy, at least on paper. So what seems to be the issue? We know at least that the use of religion as a populist tool seems to be, you know, making things difficult. Now, to the example, 1982-83 was the first Ahmadi case that happened in Malaysia. In fact, there was one or two before that, but this was the one that was reported. What happened is, the Kedah state government's Majlis Agama Islam had passed a fatwa saying if you believe in the teachings of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who is the founder of the Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat, you are considered to have left Islam, or kafir or murtad, something to that effect. And these views are not to be, you know, spread by people who consider themselves Muslims. And then, of course, there was this man named Abdul Rahim Bahauddin. Abdul Rahim Bahauddin was standing in the streets of Al-Star giving out pamphlets relating to the Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat. Religious officers arrested him and charged him under the state Islamic offenses, you know, for publishing these things and saying that you're spreading views that is not what is deemed Islam. He went to the courts. Back then in 82, in High Court of Al-Star, he got a writ of prohibition. In other words, it is an order by the court to stop you from doing something, directed to the government, to stop the government from doing something, or any government functionary. He managed to secure a writ of prohibition against the Sharia court from listening to his matter on the basis that if the state has said you are not a Muslim, you then cannot be subject to Islamic laws anymore. And I think that's a simple question of common sense. Yes, you can't have it both ways, exactly. So simple. And the interesting thing is, the judge allowed it, you know, and the judge had a very good explanation for it as well. He said, you know, this is being done to protect fundamental rights. If you can say you can do this anytime you want, then the constitutional guarantees become meaningless. So that happened in 1980s. Of course, ever since then, our judges, they somehow seem to be reading a different constitution. The decisions are not consistent anymore, and it's getting more bizarre at times. And you can see this dynamic breakdown when you look at Sharia court cases involving the Sharia court and money. You know, that's when you really see things are really fair. Trust property and things like that. You see that everything, you know, is right. It's to be decided by the civil courts. But the moment an issue in the veneer of apostasy or conversion comes along, all of a sudden the Sharia courts will have to listen to the matter. And these are civil court judges saying this, you know. So this to me as a lawyer is disturbing, because you are a high court judge, you are all powerful, but yet you are saying, well, maybe you need to give it to someone else to decide this matter. So it's bizarre, because it's someone saying, I have less power than I actually have, you know, and that's what makes things very disturbing. Now, so as I see it, you just need respect for those two things, constitutionalism and human rights. And within that framework of constitutionalism, you have all this, you know, principles. Now, of course, naturally you have to ask the question, how do we get out of this mess that we're in? Now, there are many things that I think can be pursued, legal means. I mean, I think that the three fundamental power bases will always have to be approached. Even if you think they are not working and they're defective, they still have to be approached. There's legislature, pass a law, review the law, amend the law, something to do with that effect. Executive, the executive government, approach them, change their policy, and the judiciary, ultimately, to keep the other two in check. Now, that's with respect to actual, you know, structure itself. Now, there's also a real need to educate the public, because the public need to be made aware of what is constitutionalism, what does the Constitution actually say? And I hope I have a little bit time. I would just like to deal with this this Allah case. So what do these things actually mean? And like I've always said, forums like this are really great, but of course you have to take them back and discuss with your friends, because you shouldn't let stupid people tell you how they can control you, you know, and just take it just that like that, you know, because these people have no moral or even legal authority sometimes to do what they do, and they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. So public education is important, and of course amongst the young, I think that this country has a terrible track record in educating the young in schools about important political concepts like constitutionalism and even human rights. Now, another aspect to things that need to be explored is interfaith dialogues. These are very important, and you have to understand what interfaith dialogues are. Interfaith dialogues are not an opportunity to criticize other people's religious doctrines and beliefs. It's never been that. So when I come across, you know, this story of certain universities having this kind of, you know, religious bashing session, this is unhealthy for the development of religious relations. The whole point of interfaith dialogues is to try to find common values that exist between religions. Peace, love, compassion, forgiveness, this kind of things, and to see how you can harness these qualities and apply it in your religious life, you know, not to find a way to oppress others, you know, or to defame, so to speak, you know, other people's religious doctrines and beliefs. Now, moving on quickly to this whole Allah issue, this is the second example I can think of, where we have all the protections, but things don't seem to work. Now, what actually happened in that case? You had the Minister of Home Affairs, a man who's responsible for the security of the country, that's all, that's his job, making a decision to stop this Catholic Church's religious publication, which they, mind you, as I understand it, circulated amongst themselves. Yeah, to stop them from using this particular word. And the justification was entirely based on religion. It's written in the court papers. I've read it in the decision before. He says, well, Allah is only exclusive to Muslims. How do you know that? You are a Minister of Home Affairs. You are supposed to be responsible for security, peace, public order. You have no business getting involved in religious dogma, religious doctrine, belief. So we see there immediately a Minister of Civil Administration making a decision on religion affecting a religious minority, you know. High Court judge was, of course, the way I looked at it, perfect. She saw the issue, and you had an independent judiciary. That's why the Catholic Church won in the High Court. And then you come to the Court of Appeal, and you don't see that, you know. You see further imposition of religion by judges on this religious minority. Judges don't have competency to talk matters of religion, you know. Your job is just to read the law, that's it. So, you see, that's another example. So, we seem to have the checks and balances in place. The structure is there. But the problem is that, well, the application of things don't seem to be working that way. But what is important is the public needs to know what went wrong and what can be done so that this doesn't happen again. Just one last point, this business on deviancy. Yeah. Now, here's something else. I've never seen this discussed before, but I think this needs to be tackled. Earlier, Dr. Patricia made this statement on the state enactments that stop non-Muslims from using certain words. Personally, I think it's unconstitutional because the basis for that power is from the Constitution itself. The Constitution says the states may restrict. But what does the state allow to restrict? You are only allowed to restrict the propagation of religious doctrine or belief. So it must be a religious doctrine, not words. Words can be used by anyone, you know. But religious doctrine, so for instance, you say you may not speak about the Holy Trinity or rather give pamphlets out on it in certain places, you know, and that's propagation. That's beginning to tell others about my religion. That's not allowed in the Malaysian constitution. We have to accept that. If you're not happy, you have to amend it. But that's it. But it has to be a religious doctrine or belief. It cannot be just Allah, Haji, whatever, you know. Yeah, it cannot be that. So to me, that's excess of power. So, which leads to our second problem as well, because in this country, since the 80s, politicians from certain political parties have been misinterpreting the law and have come up with laws that are very clearly unconstitutional or in complete disregard of the Constitution. And that's why you have a lot of the problems that you have these days. Things like the transgenders in Negeri Sembilan, that's another good example as well. I mean, how can you police how people dress on the streets? That's never been part of Malaysia, and it shouldn't be either. And you'll also notice we never used to have laws like this, you know, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It's only in the 80s that things like this start cropping up. So if this have cropped up and we have a problem, that means things need to be scaled down, you know. So comes to my final point and I'm done. Civil society movements are extremely important, and whether you like it or not, sometimes you have to work with politicians. Politicians themselves sometimes have to work with each other. This country, I see it's quite peculiar how the opposition and the other side, they look at each other as complete opposites, but they're not, you know. If you sit down and work out trying to come up with an administration of government that is based on rationality and solving problems, I think we would have a much better government than a government that demonizes the opposition and say that these people are completely unreliable. So civil society, and by civil society I mean everyone, you know, statutory bodies, faith groups, women's groups, rights groups, all these people, trade unions, they must come together, must work together, approach politicians and see how you can refine the law, reform the law, explain the problems, document problems. I think the whole transgender issue, the reason it became big was because there was lots of documentation of it. We knew how many people were being violated, how many people were being, you know, treated so badly by some of the state governments. I'll just pause here. Thank you.